Mac Deford is a Coast Guard veteran, a dedicated public servant, an attorney, and now a Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District. I talk one-on-one with Mac for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Mac Deford, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
It's nice to be here, Quintin. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Me and you actually met for the first time a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday in downtown Charleston, right around the corner here at the Charleston Visitor Center. You were coming back from a conference. I was getting ready, wrapping up an interview with Quintin's Close-Up with one of the political candidates from North Charleston. And I mentioned that because obviously you are a candidate for the 1st Congressional District as a Democrat. You're also a United States Coast Guard veteran, a dedicated public servant, and an attorney. What got you from being a Coast Guard veteran and then, of course, an attorney to now saying that you want to run for Congress?
Well, Quintin, first, it was great to run into you there on Mary Street. What a coincidence. So the Coast Guard brought me down here to the Low Country in 2010. I was 21 years old and fell in love with the area. So I knew I wanted to put roots down here. So after my tour in the Coast Guard, I got out of the Coast Guard and attended our local schools here. I attended the Citadel in the Veterans Program on the GI Bill, and then knew I wanted to go to law school. I think being in the Coast Guard at a young age, you have these, you want to go in and make a difference and save lives, but then you realize that there's all this policy stuff that exists that you really are more unaware of as a young person. So I knew that I wanted to go to law school and ultimately become an attorney to try to affect change as an attorney. And so that's exactly what I set out to do. And after a couple of years in the corporate world, I worked for a company called Blackbaud as an in-house attorney there. I took a job with the town of Mount Pleasant. I was the number 2 attorney there, and then most recently, I was the general counsel for the town of Hilton Head Island. So, working on a lot of the issues that we face on a day-to-day basis. I've worked on everything from affordable housing projects to infrastructure and road projects, public safety initiatives, and so, with that background, I really see a lot of the gaps that exist between what we need here in the Low Country on the ground. On a day-to-day basis and what's going on there in Washington, a lot of the gridlock. So that's a big part of why I'm running. And I would say also, I'm 34 years old, and so I, represent a younger generation, and I think that we need to start cycling in younger people into public office, into Congress. Currently, the House is made up of 12% of millennials, so we need to start cycling them in because millennials have some great ideas.
Yes, sir. We all, me and you are actually in the same age bracket as well. So there you go. But let me go to Washington. As you know, the House just passed a bill to fund the government until the beginning of 2024. The deadline to pass it will be actually tomorrow. The vote passed 336 to 95. It passed with the support of 127 Republicans, and 209 Democrats. So, and by the way, the Senate just passed the bill just yesterday. If you were in Congress today, would you have voted to pass a long-term funding bill that would actually address the deficit?
Yes, I mean, I think they need to get under the hood of that. With that vote yesterday, I think it's important to point out that Nancy Mace voted against it, and I think it's really dangerous to play with the potential of shutting down the government when you have no alternative plan. I don't have any quarrel with, wanting to try to balance the budget and being fiscally responsive, but at the same time, you can't just shut down the government. I mean, it has such an impact both on our military readiness, on our federal employees, and all the services that our federal government provides to our citizens. So doing something like that without there being a plan in place or proposing an idea, I think is really dangerous. And part of being in public office, part of being a leader is not just pointing out problems, but putting forth solutions. And that's something that we haven't seen out of Congresswoman Nancy Mace.
To be fair, according to her Twitter account, she said that last night I had a family emergency in South Carolina that required me to delay my travel for a few hours and prevented me from getting to Washington in time to vote. My position has been clear, and she also is talking about the Homeland Security Secretary deserves to be impeached, and I would have voted to impeach him. So let me ask you this, Mike. When it comes to this bill that you said that she actually, voted against, what type of plan would you keep forth, to the fourth to actually keep the government going?
I mean, we have to adopt a budget, and so that's the problem right now, and we have a lot of gridlock in Washington. So figuring out that budget is something that Congress needs to be working on. Until then, that's why we have these continuing resolutions, so that we keep the government open, keep it funded until Congress is able to adopt a formal budget.
So what would be the ideal formal budget right now?
I mean, that's a loaded question. I mean, we've got to pay for a lot of different things. I think that some of the points in contention right now are on funding. Providing aid to Ukraine has become a point of contention. Aid to Israel; those are two very contentious issues that have really created a lot of the stall that we've seen in Washington.
And I want to talk to you about that in just a second. But going back to that bill, Mac, what about the Democrats? Do you believe this vote would have actually failed in the House?
Yeah, I think yeah, without the Democrats, sure.
So, should this particular bill have had aid to Ukraine and Israel in your mind?
I believe so. Yes. I believe that both conflicts are interconnected, because Iran is a big partner military alliance with Russia. Russia is waging a war against Ukraine, and Iran is also providing aid to terrorists that are have infiltrated into Israeli borders. With that being said, I do think that Israel needs to show a measured restraint in how they respond to this, because there was a humanitarian crisis in the Middle East, and it's something that in Palestine, Israel needs to be sensitive of. We don't want this conflict to spread any further than it's already gone. The loss of life is unimaginable, and so I just wanted to put that out there as well.
What should be the level of restraint when it comes to Ukraine?
I think Ukraine has a right to maintain, to fight for its territory back that has been taken. I think that Ukraine's sovereignty was violated. I think that poses a threat to our other European allies and our NATO allies. So I think that we should continue to support Ukraine. They were not expected to be able to defend themselves against Russia. I think even our top generals in the United States gave them, a matter of days or weeks, and here we are. All this time later, Ukraine is still doing all of this with a relatively small spend of the U.S. defense budget in supporting Ukraine. Ukraine's been able to hang on and really take some offensive measures too against Russia in order to gain territory back.
What other measures should they take without asking the United States government for more money?
I think that diplomacy should be exhausted at all points, and so I think that there should be diplomatic efforts to try to end this war in Ukraine. That being said, I think right now it's difficult. It does not appear to me that Putin has any sort of desire to give back any land or really stop its assault.
Going back to the money, Mr. Mack, what type of balance should there be when it comes to financially supporting Ukraine in their war with Russia and actually limited government spending?
I think that I don't think it can be overstated that how important it is for the United States to support Ukraine. We have not lost any U.S. service members in that conflict, and that is all. Ukraine is bearing that burden right now. I do believe that if Russia was to be able to successfully overtake Ukraine and take its sovereignty, that would really pose a serious threat to European stability and that of our allies, especially our NATO allies, and that would really disintegrate the stability of global economies and the security of our allies, and also U.S. personnel abroad.
So how does the global economy look like since this war actually began?
I think that the global economy is shifting. I mean, here in the United States, we faced a spike in inflation, and now it's going down. And I credit that a lot to a lot of the initiatives that the Biden-Harris administration has passed, the Inflation Reduction Act. We're investing in our infrastructure. We're investing in our people. We're seeing record number of jobs being created, and so I think that the future is bright. But we have to, of course, elect people that are serious about getting things done in Washington and getting past this gridlock that we see.
Where exactly is infrastructure helping in your particular district?
I think that where the infrastructure bill is going to do the most good here will be with broadband internet. I mean, that is such an important aspect to people being able to connect to learning. It has medical purposes as well with telehealth. Oh, yeah. To a lot of our citizens in rural areas that perhaps can't make it to the doctor's office. I've been to places in the 1st District where they don't have access to public transportation. They don't have medical offices. So telehealth is really important. Having access to broadband internet with that is important, but also to invest in our roadways. We have bridges in South Carolina that are going to be ending the end of their useful life soon. I think about the 278 bridge down in Hilton Head. That one, we're already in the process of planning for replacing that bridge. There's a lot of talks on that, and then public transportation. We saw the $26 million that came in for CARTA, so those are huge investments for the Low Country. That's what we need, and we need to see more of that.
Okay, with broadband, I know you're running to become a congressman, but should the state of South Carolina make broadband a state utility?
Yeah, I mean, I think that providing broadband, I think that every family, every household should have access to broadband internet. It's such a we are such a connected society in terms of the internet. We do all of our work via the internet. That's how we communicate a lot of the times, and so anyone who's not able to access the internet, they're being left out of our society, and I don't think that's good.
Where exactly in the 1st Congressional District, Mr. Mack, do people actually have access to broadband?
I mean, I think a lot of households have access to broadband. It looks like you're outside. You've potentially on your phone, or maybe you're connected to the building's Wi-Fi.
Right.
But where I'm concerned about are places like Seabrook, South Carolina, and Beaufort County. I was down there a few months ago for a food drive, and I saw a community that doesn't have very many resources. And so having that connectivity, being able to access broadband, whether it be for educational purposes or for medical purposes, I think that that's significantly needed, especially in areas that where there are underserved communities that really need investment.
Where do you invest in telehealth in those particular rural areas?
Are you asking, would I invest in that?
Where exactly should you should invest telehealth in those rural areas?
I think that, again, if households have access to broadband internet, they then have access to telehealth services, whether it be through MUSC or Beaufort Memorial. So that, I think, is how they could access those services.
And I want to get back to that in just a second, but obviously you mentioned infrastructure. So let me dive into it from a generality standpoint. Do you believe, when it comes to infrastructure, that this administration is actually using the same infrastructure plans that were supposed to be fixed under the Obama infrastructure plan?
I'm not sure what plans that you're referring to specifically, but I think that that what the Biden-Harris administration, what the current administration has done, is monumental. I mean, the level of investment into our infrastructure. If we're not going to have investment in these bridges that need to be fixed, I mean, you look at 526. You look at the traffic in our area. It's just going to get worse as more and more people move here. They reach driving age. And if we don't have public transportation, if we cannot alleviate the traffic congestion, if we can't have safe bridges, I mean, we've seen 526 with some safety issues with one of the bridges, with one of the cables. All of that money is going to be spent to invest in our infrastructure. And I don't see this infrastructure bill being the end all be all, but it's a significant step in the right direction.
How much of that infrastructure money will actually make it to South Carolina and your district?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, and I think a lot of that has to depend on who our congressional representative is, because of course through the congressional earmark process, that's like one of the basic functions of your congressional representative is to fight for that money. So that's a big part of it.
Let me go back in time here. In 1989, most Americans paid for rural broadband, school technology with phone line surcharges, and E-rate taxes. And reportedly, people are still paying for those fees on every phone number today. And I know that the Obama-Biden administration spent billions on infrastructure that was supposed to be shovel-ready by at least 2009. Why do you think people are still paying for that today?
Well, 1989 was actually the year I was born. So is your question why are people still paying for internet?
Well, paying for things back then in 1989, they were paying for rural broadband, school technology with the phone line surcharges and E-rate taxes. And people are still paying for those fees today. Why do you think there still are?
Well, I think it's because we didn't have any legislation. I mean, you can set programs into place, but then you have to fund them. And so I think that's where a lot of the problems come from is, you can have a policy in place, but if it's not funded, then it's not going to come to fruition. So again, I think that this infrastructure law is a huge step in the right direction, and we need to see more investment like that.
But in 15 years, Mr. Mack, and if broadband is a thing of the past, will Americans still be paying for that infrastructure?
I would like to see them not. Again, internet is such a part of our everyday society. You look at some of the efforts that are being, around the world to bring broadband internet, wireless internet capabilities into other countries even that don't have access to internet. So yeah, I think that it's such a part of our everyday life. Everyone needs to be a part of it. Otherwise, you're just totally left out of our society.
And let me go back to your district. You talked about a little bit of it earlier, but let me talk to you. How many infrastructure projects are there currently in the 1st Congressional District?
Well, there are a lot. I can tell you, I've worked on quite a few in Mount Pleasant, and then also for the town of Hilton Head Island. I can tell you, a big deal for people down there in southern Beaufort County is the 278 bridge and the 278 expansion. You have a bridge that is, series of bridges that are at the end of their useful life. They need to be replaced, and we need to have a plan for that. And those bridges have to be built in a way that are going to be climate resilient, but they're going to have to be built in a way that's also takes into account our environment and then also people's land.
Mm. So if you get into Congress, say next year, what type of environmental study would you do for the district?
Well, are you talking about specifically about the 278 bridge?
Oh yeah, those bridges as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that studies need to be conducted when you're about to build a bridge to see what the environmental impacts are going to be, and I think you need to build a bridge that's going to be most efficient for the population that you have, take into account what potential projections are for future population to make sure that it's because once you build a bridge, it's not like you 5 years go by you build another one. It's there for quite a while. But you also want to do it while minimizing any negative or harmful impacts to the environment.
So let me just talk about the obvious. Where do you see the projections for population in your district in the next 5 years?
Growing, especially down in Beaufort County. We've seen a lot of growth up here in the Charleston County area, also up in the Berkeley County, Dorchester County. So we're seeing a lot of growth. And I think that it's starting to shift down to Beaufort. We've got a lot of development down there as well, and they need a lot of investment in their infrastructure, their roadways and other infrastructure, community investment.
So, okay, how can you ensure growth in those areas with smart growth?
I think a lot of it is, when you have a lot of development going on, which is not bad, but you have to do it smartly, and you have to make sure that you have an infrastructure that is planned and going to be in place to support that population growth, so that you don't have a population that doubles still using a road system that was built for a population that's maybe a quarter, was originally designed for a quarter of the size of the population. Otherwise, you run into issues like we have in Charleston right now, where you have so much traffic and it's just getting worse and worse.
I hate to pick on Beaufort County, which I love, by the way, but let me ask you, do they actually have a sufficient road system in place to take care of this future population that's going to come that way?
I mean, I think that generally the road systems in Beaufort County are sufficient for now, but I think, again, you have to plan. It's not just handling the population, it's also handling flooding and sea level rise. That's a huge issue with it as well. So as we look at these roads and how we're going to build new roads, we have to make sure that we're building roads that are not going to be sitting beneath sea level, or going to be flooding out a lot, like we have in Charleston. A lot of roads that it'll be perfectly sunny out, but it's high tide, and you got parts of downtown that are completely flooded out.
How do you stop overdevelopment?
Well, that's a huge local issue. That's not something that I think that the Congressional Congress has direct oversight of. But I think that one thing is, pardon me, how I look at it is, how can the congressional representative, how could I, if I was in Congress, help manage that growth? Help communities thrive even though they're experiencing massive amount of growth. And I think that that's by making sure that there's sufficient funding for infrastructure to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to support that population growth.
Do you believe you have enough funding for the next 5 to 10 years for your district?
I mean, I think we're going to have to see what happens with Congress. Are they going to pass what the budget's going to look like? And that's a big concern of mine with the gridlock, the divisiveness in Congress. People that don't seem very serious about getting the job done, and seem more intent on how many times they can be on TV, or how many likes they can get on Twitter or Facebook.
You talk about the budget, Mr. Mack. Why is it important for the United States to send billions of taxpayers' dollars to Ukraine and Israel when we're actually in the middle of a recession?
Well, I don't think we're in the middle of a recession necessarily, but I do think that, again, the world looks to the United States as a leader, and we have that responsibility, whether we like it or not. And if we were to renounce it, then somebody else is going to fill that void. And we have to ask ourselves, is that something that we as a country would be comfortable with? I don't think that most Americans think that is something that they would be comfortable with. And so when we look at, Ukraine, for example, we have to understand that Russia, Putin is playing the same, Soviet era tactics, wanting to take territory back that used to belong to the USSR. And so we have to support Ukraine in its efforts to repel Russian aggression. Otherwise, again, it threatens to completely destabilize the entire European region.
But Mr. Mack, how many billions of dollars is enough for aid for Ukraine and Israel?
I'm sorry?
But then, how much billions of dollars in aid is actually enough for Ukraine and Israel?
I don't know the answer to that question. How much? I don't think there's a magic number of what it would cost to sufficiently end the war. Again, I think diplomacy has to be used. I don't think war should ever be the answer unless every diplomatic avenue has been exhausted. But Ukraine didn't start this war. Russia did. And it's not the first time that they've made a go at Ukraine. So I think we have to continue to support Ukraine, but also continuing to put economic pressures on Russia and utilize diplomacy so that we can hopefully end this war.
What economic pressures should you put on them right now so that we can actually save money later on?
I think the Biden administration has already put a lot of sanctions on Russia, and they're feeling it. I think we have to keep on with that. I mean, when the war broke out, for example, we saw a lot of Russian citizens that had assets in the United States or under U.S. control being seized. So that was very effective. I think we have to keep putting those pressures on, but also, Russia is actively attacking Ukraine militarily. They're in a war, so we have to continue to support them.
So, Mr. Mack, right now as we sit here, how much is really these two wars, the war in obviously Ukraine and the war in Israel, how much is that actually costing the average taxpayer here in America?
I think it depends on what tax bracket what you're paying, but I would say that the war in Ukraine is costing a very small percentage of the U.S. defense budget, and we're able to see Ukraine be that successful without losing a single U.S. service member life. I served in the military, and the last thing I would like to see are men and women going over there to fight in this war. So again, I say Ukraine's bearing that burden. We need to continue to support them.
Would you, if you become congressman, that is, reduce the defense budget by 25% if elected?
Well, that's never been something I've proposed.
Yeah, if you were to be in Congress, how would you reduce the defense budget by 25% if elected?
I guess what I'm saying is I've never proposed that the defense budget should be reduced by 25%. That's an awful lot.
Well, how much would you reduce it by?
I'm not sure that the defense budget needs to be reduced necessarily. I think that you should cut unnecessary spending and perhaps reallocate funds. But cutting the defense budget, I do think we have global responsibilities. We have a lot of instability around the world, and the United States has a global presence, whether we like it or not. And in order to continue to meet our obligations, we have to keep our military at a sufficient level of readiness.
So let me say this. Let me ask this then: if you can go around, what would you trim out of the budget to save some money and keep the defense going and keep these troops safe around the world?
I think one way that you can save money is by ensuring, and this is a very dry subject, but that the government procurement process, how the government allocates contracts, so that these defense contractors are not building projects that are just going to take more time than we thought, and we're just going to keep throwing out a project. You take the F-35, for example, the multi-purpose fighter jet, that we've expended a lot more money than we thought we were going to. So I think holding our government contractors more accountable, I think that's one way that we can help with that. But we have to understand too that not every dollar that we put into the defense budget is just gone, right? It gets back into the economy, and you think about how many military bases we have abroad. We think about the military base, the Navy Air Force Base, the Joint Base Charleston. Yes. You think about the Marine Corps Air Station and Parris Island down in Beaufort County. Think about how many people that employs in the local community. So not every dollar we put in the defense budget is just gone.
Unfortunately, Zoom is not giving me much time here. Unfortunately, but I hope to get you back on Quintin's Close-Ups in the spring so we can talk more about some current issues at that time. But for now, Mac Deford, who's running for the United States Congress as a Democrat, thank you for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. Thank you.
You're welcome.